All right, so we're live. Lexi's coming back in. So, welcome everybody. This is the Clinical Breakroom Podcast. This is episode number 4. So, if you guys have never heard of us before, we're both, Lexi and I are both nurses. We've been nurses for, almost 4 years now. And this is our first guest on the podcast. Her name's Tanya Linsley. She's kind of has a pretty unique
Hi.
background of nursing in general, and we'll let her kind of introduce herself and talk about her experience and how she kind of. We're going to mainly talk about entrepreneurship as a nurse and kind of dive into that and discuss that you don't have to just work at the bedside. You can do fun and unique stuff as a nurse and all the different types of things that we can talk about to not just do bedside work. So.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be part of your journey as well. I've been a nurse for 15 years, have my master's degree, started out in med-surg, was there for a couple of years, then moved my way up in years in ICU. In the last 5 years, I have been doing my own thing as an entrepreneur, as a nutrition coach, lifestyle coach for people who need to change the trajectory of their lives. And I've been doing that full time for the past 2 years, which that's went by really fast. So there's a lot of great things that I have experienced at the bedside, but also outside of the bedside as a nurse.
Yeah, so I think it's really cool to see like any nurse who's working, not because there's lots of different fields you can work as a nurse, right? And then what you did is like you're completely like full on entrepreneur. Like you aren't working, there's other things you can do like such as working for a clinic or you know all kinds of different fields. You can do dialysis clinic, you can do wound care clinic like Lexi, and then there's home health. There's lots of different options with nursing, which makes it great. But you can also be, doing your own thing as a nurse. A lot of people think that you have to get like a advanced degree to have your own business as a nurse and all that, but that's not necessarily true. So, what exactly, if you don't mind, just telling them like what exactly you did as because you did this even because I remember Tanya and I used to work together in the ICU very shortly. Before she went full on entrepreneur, but you were doing it even while you were working at the bedside still. So I think it's pretty interesting. Do you mind kind of introducing like what you did and what you do now, and we can kind of get into those kind of topics too.
Yeah, so I did work on what I say, like I developed a 5-year plan of moving away from the bedside. I kind of married into this idea. So my husband's owned a gym for, I think, since 2007. So when we got married, I kind of got married into his business. And then got a little involved with doing some nutrition challenges at the gym. And that's kind of what introduced the idea for me. And what was probably the biggest factor was that I really saw that people really needed to learn how to change versus just do these challenges. And that comes with a lot of like coaching processes. A lot of the things that we get to teach at the bedside, but we realize that 15 minutes, 30 minutes, or even a 2-week span for a family in the ICU, that's not enough to like coach someone through actually changing a behavior that we've grown to have for like 40 years, right?
Yeah.
So I started doing some one-on-one on my own. This was actually probably 2017, and I didn't take it serious until 2019, where I was just really deciding this is actually what I want to do, and I want to try and see if I can do that on my own. And so I did that part-time as well as working at the hospital full-time until I could build up a clientele.
Yeah.
Interesting. I didn't have a full clientele just from our gym. I ended up getting a lot of other people that came to me because I was a nurse and because of my background that wanted help with changing what their lifestyle needed to be to support like healthier lab markers, which would be like, bringing blood pressure down, cholesterol, helping with, better A1Cs, that kind of thing. So the fact that I actually had the background as a nurse and my experience did help tremendously with fulfilling what I actually wanted to be as a nutrition coach.
Yeah. What Lexi and I talk about this too a lot is that, we talked about this in our last podcast, actually, that there's not a whole lot of decent primary care out there. There's a very big deficient of, understanding how to prevent disease just in the general public. Have you seen, like, when you go ahead and do your, like, teachings with people for, like, the first time, are they completely, like, from your experience, a lot of them are, like, mind blown with all the different stuff that maybe they weren't paying attention to for so long? Because it's starting to, like, even for us, like, well, Lexi did home health too, so she'll probably be able to say more about this, is that a lot of people don't really even take their blood pressure at all, like, especially people who are on, like, beta blockers. Like, they don't even know, like, to take their blood pressure when they're, like, on blood pressure medicine. Like, have you seen a whole lot of, like, like, when people come to you, are they, like, mind blown at the fact that they didn't know about half the stuff that you teach them, such as, like, even as simply, like, lab values or what they even mean?
Yeah. And sometimes I'm surprised, and sometimes I'm not really surprised. But
yes.
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's more of just, most of the time when someone does learn that they have something like high blood pressure or whatever, they're really only getting 30 minutes at best now with their doctor of understanding like what that means, but not just what it means in a sense of just high blood pressure, but it could be, what does that mean if it stays out of control? What can happen as a complication for the high blood pressure? And applying to that to like your quality of life, not just now, but thinking like leading the conversation of what do you want your life to look like in 10 years from now if things don't change?
Yeah.
So it is, yeah, it's educating them. What does it mean? What does it mean for you specifically? How you want your life to look like? What are some behavioral changes that support that? And guiding them to do some of the action plan that actually complements their particular lifestyle, not going off of like what I think my life should look like, because everyone's kind of different. Everyone has different core values.
Yeah.
But they do come off a little like very confused, like, oh, well, my physician didn't say that, or I wasn't really taught that. And they could have been taught that, but in reality, someone needs to hear the same conversation over and over before it starts to even click. And you got to keep having that conversation before they even learn what that actually means. So one conversation is not enough for someone to actually absorb the fact that they have blood pressure and high blood pressure and things that have to change, or any other condition, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we've noticed, like, especially Lexi, like, there's just so much, there's like two different things, I feel like. It's either they don't care enough, which most of the time, people that come to you probably at least, care at least somewhat, probably, about their health. And then there's the other side who just don't know. Like, there's just no, like, either they didn't grow up in, like, a healthy family. Like, I feel like that has a lot to do with it, too, is, people talk about how there's, like, generational or hereditary obesity. But how much of that is actually hereditary and how much is that actually mimicking what you grew up around? Like, your lifestyle is, what you grew up in, like, as a child really does make a huge difference of what you think is okay and what's not okay. So, like, we talk about our 5-year-old who, like, catches us if we do anything unhealthy. She'll, like, hey, that's not you guys don't usually drink that. That's unhealthy. Like, so, like, a child who, like, grows up in an environment that understands already, like, what's good and what's not good for your body versus someone who didn't have that guidance, I think is a huge game changer, especially for people. And they don't really necessarily, from my opinion, I guess, is that people don't really understand that their entire life compounds into a big health event, like what we would see in like the ICU. It's not usually something that's just like a one-time thing. And, just spontaneously happens. This is like a lifestyle that you can have control over. That a lot of people don't think they have control over their own health, which is pretty interesting. So I was curious to ask you that.
I feel like some people don't wake up until like an event happens. And then a lot of like that teaching, on why they're in the hospital and what's going on. And the hospital has dietitians and things that go in and do teaching. But like when someone's in an acute state or they're in a hospital, like they're already stressed and they're not going to retain very much information. And you get a packet sent home with you, but like who reads that? And there's like big words, like you don't understand it. And so like when a home health nurse goes out there, I can vouch that like a lot of times when patients come home, they're on like 15 different meds. And like I've tried many times to get a dietitian to go out to a home, and it just doesn't happen. So it's like, okay, you have dietitians in the hospital, and I know they, look at patients and their diagnoses and make sure that they're getting the right food when they're, inpatient. But like, when you're home and you're in your own environment, I feel like it would be so beneficial if a dietitian could go to your home, like on a home health kind of thing, and like, look at your kitchen. How do you function in your kitchen? What would work best for you with to improve your eating habits and do things like that. And I feel like that is just not there. Insurance does not cover that. And to me, that is like preventative, and you going into the hospital and charging even more, money towards your insurance company. And it's like, why is that not a thing?
Yeah.
No, so both of y'all did talk, y'all mentioned some like key things. So one, William, you said like these are compounding events. And I think that is one thing people need to realize. So just like this was not an isolated event and just didn't happen overnight, the things that you're changing are also compounding events. So they're going to be little things that you can change that add up really big towards the end of like a month or a 60-day thing or a 90-day thing. And I think that sometimes when we're thinking of these things as, oh, I have to change my sleep. I have to control my stress. I have to change my diet. I have to weigh myself every day. Like all these things they become very overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And where you have the guidance of having somebody help you break that down where something seems less overwhelming and more realistic and practical. And then Alexis, you did say like setting up your environment is huge. Like that is one of the main things that I talk with my clients about. It's like, how are you making it easy for yourself to be successful by setting up your kitchen with a flow that you might want to try to cook? Or are you always having the foods that aren't supportive right up in your face? Like you don't have to have them out of your household and say that they're completely, off the market. We can't have that. But stop making it so tempting and make some of these other things look a little bit more appealing.
Yeah.
And that is one thing that is very frustrating because insurances don't cover stuff like that can make it even more impactful. So, right now you can find lots of registered dietitians that are great, and they are very geared towards coaching, not just giving a meal plan and insurance cover their services. You just have to find the right individual.
Yeah. Yeah. It's especially the dietitian world. There's really not that many of them. Like a lot of them are actually sucked into the hospital environment. There's really not much availability outside of the hospital environment, which is we always talk about that's kind of funny because if anything, I don't know. It's important, obviously, get good nutrition while you're in the hospital. But, we have, like, the sick patients who need, like, real, you need to pay a lot, like, real close attention to it. But, it's just as, or if not more important, like, outside of the hospital because there's so much misinformation out there, too. Like, there's just so much stuff that you can just gather and just think this is, like, good for you. And like you said, like, if you do this for a certain amount of time, you compound it into lots of different, years, then it will end up causing some sort of medical, issue with yourself. So I definitely do think that dietitians do need to be, like you said, it would be really nice if they did prioritize nutrition and include like dietary, like consulting along with your healthcare, but I don't know if that's ever going to happen. So
I know that there's a CHF clinic that kind of runs in the clinic I'm in, and they have a dietitian come in and talk to the patients in the outpatient clinic.
That's nice.
Yeah, when they see the doctor. So that's super cool, and they follow up with them. I know it's a short visit, and I'm not sure how beneficial it is. I mean, I'm sure they run. I'm sure they look at some type of scale and how it's benefiting the patients, but they do have a dietitian that sees the CHF patients, which is super cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely nice when you have it, and I think it's just a little too rare, of course, like as you said. So, yeah, it's like when you have a dietitian, just even having them around is like you're putting more focus on the preventative type stuff that no one really talks about, and like that you're not. So like, especially like diabetes, for example, like you can reverse diabetes depending on, how much damage you let it do to your body over the years. But if it's like a new diagnosis, we had a guest on a long time ago that had like really bad, like not just like metformin diabetes, it's just brand new. Like this guy was on Lantus and, ACHS, short acting insulins. And he was like, what, like 300 some pounds maybe. And he completely, lost weight, reversed his diet, paid a lot of close attention to his nutrition. He's completely off all of his meds. Like he was on I think he said he was getting close to like maybe 15, 20 meds, which is pretty crazy. Like these are the patients that we see in the hospital all the time. Like, that have had chronic illness for years and years. And then here you see a guy that, was at that stage. I think he was a young diabetic, but still like, the fact that a lot of people don't even know, like, I feel like a lot of people actually do think that
you don't have to have diabetes. When they diagnose you, I feel like they're like, oh, I have to live with this the rest of my life. No, you don't.
Yeah.
You don't have to.
And it's just like kind of like the same thing you said about, keep, like, what do you want, like, you talk about foods that you bring into your house and, discouraging you to do the work, like cooking, like, the good foods and stuff. I feel like it's the same thing with medications. They can throw a medication at you and it's super easy because you do it real quick and then you're done, but there's the other alternative where you can actually put the work in, lose the weight, and then pay attention to your nutrition, but which of course is harder than taking a medication that takes half a second to take. But I mean, it's a huge ordeal that like could be prevented. But I don't know, what is your opinion on like medication versus nutrition? Do you have a lot of clients, I guess I would ask, is with like lots of medications, and what is your take on that, I guess?
So I have clients that are on some medications. I've had maybe one or two clients that are on medications for weight loss. Now, if they're on multiple medications and it just can interfere with some dietary, I don't take them because I'm not a registered dietitian.
Yeah.
And I don't want it to be taken wrong as in terms of like what I'm guiding them through or coaching them through is nutrition for medicine or something. That's not my scope. But so it's interesting because a lot of people do ask that. I am a huge fan of behavioral change and nutrition. I think medication has its place. So here's my background and where I get a little torn in the middle of this. So my grandfather on my father's side was diagnosed with colon cancer at 50. This was when I was like, I don't know, I think I was 10. I'm 44 now. So anyways, he did not take the route of chemo or radiation or anything. He was completely against that. He wrote a book called Thank God I Have Cancer. So he would talk about the government and all the politics around that and big pharma.
That's actually really interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was very interesting. And he kind of tied his views to biblical views to his route of, going against cancer with nutrition. And then here I am, a nurse, and we're heavily involved with medicine, right? So I have my beliefs in the middle.
Yeah.
I think there's a place for both. When it comes to weight loss and medication, I don't think that there's anything wrong with anyone wanting to take medicine if they have a significant amount of weight to lose, but they are also in conjunction changing their behaviors.
Yeah.
But if they're not, then I have a problem with the medication. Just because in order to maintain, if you ever want to get off of the medication, I mean, you're going to have to like figure that out and work it out. The other thing that concerns me, and this actually just came up like 2 weeks ago, I had a girl come to me. She had been on Ozempic for almost a year. She really wanted to get off of it. She had a history of eating disorders. She went through therapy for that. Hasn't had any relapse, but she hasn't had any relapse because she'd been on the Ozempic. And so she, thought that she didn't really have any disordered eating anymore. But as I'm talking to her, she's really scared to come off of the Ozempic because she's afraid she's going to gain the weight back. So there's kind of like, well, how is the medication helping the other side of things when people are suffering from eating disorders? Like, she's just not even hungry on the Ozempic and doesn't even have to worry about eating. So I'm just like, I'm hesitant with my opinions on let's just lean on that, but not think about the other things that need to go into play. Like, are they being treated for like therapy in terms of like psychological therapy if they have eating disorders and they're going on a medication to help them? Are they seeing someone that can coach them through long-term behavioral change? And that's not just showing up at an office for 30 minutes to have a pulse check on how things are going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I think there's, when you say, there's a lot of weight to lose and someone, wants to try a medication to help them and they see like a little change that is encouraging and motivating to them as well, mentally, where, I mean, I can definitely see why, psychologically it can be helpful in motivation or,
Yeah, I feel like it's just a personalization type thing. Like, all people really need, I feel like, in primary care as well, is just like, they need a personalized care plan. Like us as nurses, we always talk about that. Like, that's what we're brought up in like education. Like, we need to like personalize their care plan in the hospital, but we don't have any personalization in like primary care. Because what you basically described is like, everyone's put on a protocol and everyone's expected to have either, success or failure with that protocol. And if you fail, then there's just no other alternative to that protocol that's put into primary care. It's just like everyone, and you also mentioned it too, is like there's just they don't provide enough time in the general primary care clinic. You get like 15 minutes at most, and there's just no time to like actually talk about the behavior side of it all. Like, what is the root cause of like, why are you doing this? What's the reason for this? And, there's hundreds and thousands of different ways of, I feel like you can be successful with your health. And I think it's just an individualized thing. And there's just no individualized planning in primary care today. And I feel like that's why medications are so heavily used, is because medications is basically a protocol, right? Like, someone comes in with strep. Well, you got your amoxicillin, there's your amoxicillin, that's how medicine's looked at, which of course medicine's, like you said, is appropriate in lots of different ways. I'm also kind of torn between it too, because as nurses, like, especially in the ICU, that's like 100% of what we do is like, you have to use medications. But like on the other side of things, it's like where we do have a relatively healthy person that's not like hospitalized. There's lots of different options you have to, be successful, but it has to be individualized, not just throw a medication at them and, that's what you do and then that's it. So the conversation stops there. So that's what we feel like is missing, because it's just such a protocol type world out there. Like, you get your labs, the doctor spends maybe like, or maybe they don't even do a lab review. I've seen that quite a few times. and that also has to do with the person's education and motivation too. So it's not always, obviously the doctors are working in a system too. And I feel like the doctors aren't the bad guy at all. They're just working in a system that doesn't support them to do what they need to do. So, but yeah,
right. I mean, the healthcare infrastructure is definitely complicated, and it's not friendly to our basic needs. And so I think that is one of the major problems. It's not tending to our basic needs. It's tending to the need right now, and we live in a world that is instant gratification. 100%. And so, and we get, I mean, if you think about like some of the surveys that get sent out from the hospital, it would drive me nuts because on the surveys and how we would get points or rewards for whatever our scores were, the questions were so basic. Did you have time to eat your meals? Did your nurse go over all of your side effects? Did you get included with your plan of care? But when we're so busy, it's like we don't really have the resources to do all of that. It's pretty defeating. And so on the outside, the world has these expectations of like 1, 2, and 3, and 4 are supposed to be happening, but it's not even happening, and they have no idea what's actually going on the inside. Well, these are the obstacles that we have. This is the time frame that we have, and I don't think that those two things are aligning.
Yeah, I agree. Do you think that do you think healthcare is primarily financial driven in the United States? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
I definitely, for sure, think that it is. It is more of a business model than I think that it is a patient-oriented model now. But to be fair, is, you know, if a facility, whether it's a hospital or a clinic or anything, if they can't pay their bills and keep the doors open, then they also can't help people.
Right.
I don't really know what the answer is to that, but I do think that 100% it's a business model. I think it needs to be to some degree, but I do think that there's times where the purpose of why we are there have fallen to the wayside.
Yeah, I agree. There's like a fine balance. There's such a fine line of like, you know what I mean? Like, there's such a fine line of like of healthcare in general. Is that, like, yeah, we you know, our country's capitalist, so you know everything that we have in this world is run off of like a business. So at the same time with healthcare, it's such a like sensitive thing because you know your business is taking care of people, but where's the line where it starts like where the finance is starting to prioritize over the actual service that you're providing? And that's like with any business, but of course healthcare is just another, you know, an extra step above that because you're taking care of very sensitive thing. Your product is caring for a human being, and you know there's almost nothing more important than that really. So I could definitely see like there's just such a fine line with healthcare, but like especially where like hospitals, you know, they do like in the United States we do such a good job with like advanced like critical care. Like our country's very, very good at it. I just wish I would, like Lexi and I both wish there was like just, and you too, like since you know what you do for a living is just like you're really changing people's lives about how they like, you know, change their lifestyle, and there's just not enough of that out there. And you know you're basically preventing people from having, you know, healthcare crises down the road because you know without someone like you or someone like, you know, us where we do talk about it quite a bit, and you know you're putting it in people's minds, there's nothing stopping your lifestyle from making you end up going to the hospital in later years. So, but yeah, it's just I wish the business side was a little less on the primary care side, because it really does nowadays feel like they're just, you know, here's your diagnosis, here's your medication, take it until you stop take it until, you know, something else comes along, and then we'll add another medication to prevent that from happening too. It's like here's a medication to treat your side effects from that medication. And it very well seems like that's because it's so protocol now. Like there's no individualized thing. Because like I feel like as soon as we start getting away from the individualized, personalized care, the further we get away from actually prioritizing health, and the more closer we are for getting like financially driven. So I don't know, it's just pretty interesting.
When we are watching commercials, my husband and I, we always laugh because there'll be a commercial that comes on a medication, and then it goes through the side effects, and they're like diarrhea, hot flashes, stomach ache, gallstones, death. And we're like, oh, I definitely.
Yes.
No, but I do think as a whole for society, I think it's everyone's job to try and not make it a business model. If you think about like the demands of most of the people coming through the door, I mean, their expectations are like, hey, I Googled this and I'm demanding a CT scan. And you're like, well, I don't think you need a CT scan, but the doctors are going to order a CT scan because we have to have patient satisfaction. Those costs of things, they add up to healthcare dollars. And so, I mean, it is the job of everyone to kind of help that part out where we're not only driven by a business model. But I mean, I have no idea what the answer is to that.
Yeah, I know. It's such a multifactorial like issue that I don't know if there is a good answer for it. Like there's just so much, like you said, there's just so much involved with it. It's just because like it all really does have to do with the patient for one, and like it starts with the patient no matter what, right? And then it's just such a you could go in like 1,000 different directions with this issue of why it is an issue, because like even like our population now is so conditioned to think that medication is the first choice. Which in some cases it is. It's just true. But in lots of different cases where nutrition can literally save your life. A lot of people just don't know that. But then again, I don't know about you, but we've definitely seen a trend out there that I think healthy lifestyle is becoming more popular. At least it's coming like, hopefully it's not like a fad, but it is definitely becoming more popular. Like you see more and more people like joining the gym and going and actually trying to eat healthy, and I think people's knowledge has gone a little bit towards the right direction. So it's definitely, I don't know, we'll see how it goes in the next like 10 years. But then again, there's the other side of it all with that big pharma that's also gaining power with like creating more and more medications at a faster rate, and then the advertising and then there's just it's just so complicated. But so what are your thoughts? I don't know if you feel comfortable talking about this or not, but if you don't, then we can just not talk about it. But what are your thoughts on vaccines?
So all right, I'm not anti-vaccine. I mean, I'm had all my chicken pox vaccines and all the other ones, but I don't have the COVID vaccine.
Yeah, we don't either.
And so, I mean, I don't know. I guess my thought on the vaccine is more stem from when they mandated it. Yeah. I think they pulled the mandate since then, but when it first came out, they did a mandate.
Right.
And I was very much against that because I don't think that is the way humans operate. I personally don't do well when people try to coerce me into doing something. I don't think a lot of people do anyways. But just the whole like timing of all of that, where we're all afraid of what COVID is, what are going to be the consequences of getting COVID, what are the consequences of getting the vaccine's permanent, can't remove that from the body, like those kind of things. And a lot, if you think about like the time of that period, like everything was back and forth. Like you'd say one thing and then you'd see someone go back and do a completely different thing, or they would do this precaution and then pull that precaution.
Yeah.
They would, they said, okay, let's do the vaccines and here's an incentive to get the vaccine, which I didn't understand about that.
Yeah.
And then they would do like the booster requirements, but if you are healthy and not immunocompromised or any at high risk, you don't need the booster, but you're required to get the booster if you work here. And I understand like some of the back end of that, of saying like we're really trying to build up the community, that kind of thing. But you can't tell someone to do something that is a permanent choice when they're in a state of mind where they're afraid.
Yeah.
Or they're confused. It doesn't come across right. And even, the mandate on the vaccines, and then they're pulling one vaccine because something went wrong. I think it was like the Johnson & Johnson. They held that, pulled it and held that for a while. So I was very hesitant for the mandate. It didn't sit well with me when they did that. I think it really took a lot of people's sense of control out of the mix, and that never goes well. Temporarily getting someone's buy-in by incentive or fear-based motivation, that's temporary. If an employee, buys into getting a vaccine, but then they resent you for it, and then they end up regretting it for whatever reason, what happens to the employee then, and their productivity, their job satisfaction, their engagement, and their morale just didn't seem like the right answer for it to be a mandated vaccine.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, it's...
And, they teach us in nursing school, and they teach us in the hospital too, like, you include your patient in the plan of care. Yeah. If you can include them and get them engaged in the plan of care, the likelihood that they will comply and adhere to that is much higher. So I was like, wow, why are we any different? Like, we don't have a say in this mandate. We don't have time to even like digest and absorb what's going on. Our basic needs aren't even taken care of at that time when COVID was happening.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just kind of complicated. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it did.
Wasn't a direct answer of what my opinion is, because I think people should make their own decision. If it fits their lifestyle and they feel comfortable and confident about getting the vaccine, that's perfectly fine. I think you should get it. But if you're hesitant about it, then I think you need to ask more questions.
Yeah.
Sit a little while with the answers that you're getting. Make sure you're asking those questions to someone that you have 100% confidence in and you trust, versus Googling it, and I just don't think enough people had time to do that.
Yeah.
During that.
For sure. I'd never thought in a million years that we would have something like that happen. And I am the exact same page as you. I was like, when they first started saying that they were going to mandate it, it was like a huge slap in the face, honestly. And I think it did the exact opposite of what they wanted it to do, because now they're making people more hesitant. Like, vaccine hesitancy was already a thing before COVID.
Yeah.
And then they just completely made it 10 times worse when that happened. And, behind, the freedom of speech, I think right behind that is freedom of medical choice. And if you're going to tell somebody that, you don't have a choice, you're going to get a needle go into your arm and have a permanent change to your body, a vaccine, then I just think that's totally against any human. That's like a major human right violation. I never thought that we would have something like that. And like you said, that it was like, during a time where fear was high for a lot of people, like there was a lot of unknown with that. And, just like how everything came, the shutdowns, and then the shutdowns came out, like eased up a little bit in a lot of states. And then they said you had to get the vaccine. And then, they they didn't say you had to get it. Well, they said that, like, a lot of the government didn't say you had to get it, but then, you know, they enforced it into the employers that require you to get it to continue working. So they basically indirectly said that you're forced to get the vaccine. So with me being like, I was, you know, only a year and a half in at that point as a nurse. And, you know, I'm just still kind of, you know, learning the ropes of everything, because it takes years and years to, you know, feel completely comfortable at the bedside. And
for sure.
Yeah. And it's just like, I just remember in the way that they weaponized the politics into it was very not a good idea either, because you got people mixing into the conversations of, like, you know, talking about other people's medical choice. And you got, like, when I was at work, I ended up quitting my job because the employer, of course, as you know, forced it. I ended up leaving because I was 24 years old at the time and completely healthy, nothing wrong with me, and I didn't feel like the benefit was higher than the risk. And, you know, with all the controversial stuff going out with, you know, myocarditis and all the concerns, especially with young men, I was like, there's absolutely no way I feel comfortable doing that.
I think someone called you out, like,
yeah,
a man, like someone higher up than you called you out in front of, like, everyone.
It was the manager. Yeah, I was completely harassed even exiting the hospital. Not like harassed. I'm not going to be a victim, but I was. Everyone else around me knew about it because I was standing right there, and then they mentioned, oh yeah, are you going to get it? Because if you're not, then, you know, mentioning that, you know, they're going to exit everybody who doesn't get it. Like, that did not sit right with me. And that's how, like, society was at that time. They divided people so well to think that they have a say in someone else's medical choice. And like you said, like, we're educated as nurses to advocate for one and allow people to make their own choice. So, like, yeah, it's just crazy to me that we even had a conversation about the fact that it's okay to mandate a medical choice to people, especially in a country like ours, a first world country, where it's like, you know, you do have rights, and, you know, thank God for them, but it's just behind freedom of speech, because, of course, if you can't say anything, you can't defend yourself. The next one I would say is, like, freedom of medical choice. Like, you can't just be thrown into a hospital and they can give you whatever the heck they want, you know, and then you have no say what goes on with your body. Like, that's protecting your actual health. And, I mean, like, as nurses, this isn't, like, a perfect analogy, so don't, like, come after me if everybody's in the chat, but what if us as nurses walked into a room and the patient's like, oh no, I'm not comfortable taking that medication right now. What if we went ahead and snuck it into their cup, or we forced them and shoved the medication down their throat and they took it? Like, that's like, that's completely illegal.
We go to jail.
Yes, we would go to prison. So, like, that's the thing where it just, like, it really did not sit right with me. Like, I was not anti-vax, you know, either. And, you know, for the most part, I'm still not. But at the same time, I am anti-mandate. And I do respect, I don't care, like you said, if someone wants to take the vaccine and they think it's right for them, it is appropriate for some people. Maybe for the older generation that, you know, is high risk for pulmonary disease. And, you know, we see it with the flu every year, so it isn't like a new phenomenon that, you know, right, it can help. But for young people and mandating it for the whole population, and then also all the politics that they weaponize with it, was pretty crazy to me. And it was a really hectic time because, like, yeah, you could even peacefully say, no, I don't feel comfortable. You can't even peacefully say that because then you got a group of people coming after you.
Yeah, or what about, you were trying to get a religious exemption.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh no, we're not, you can't, sorry.
Yeah. They lose my livelihood because they're mandating a medical choice, which is, yeah, and then it was just wild to me. So, I mean, I'm all about freedom of choice, and, like, just because we're nurses doesn't mean that we don't have the freedom of choice for ourselves too. Like you said, we were so deprived of, like, basic human needs as a nurse during that time. Like, you know, yeah, it wasn't abnormal to not have lunch, to not be able to pee the entire shift, or, like, do anything like you have to do. like you can't even like think about yourself when you're at work sometimes at the hospital, and just it was like a slap in the face. I felt like, you know, when they did that, especially I understand the back end, like you said, is like we're nurses, we have the obligation to protect our patients, but at the same time, we also are human beings, and you know we're not
Right.
like we can't be treated like mules. Go into a workplace and, you know, do your job and then take this vaccine, or you're not going to be able to make money or provide for your family. That just definitely wasn't the right thing. I feel like, like I said, like I respect if it was right for you and you take the vaccine, that's fine. I don't think that, you know, you're dumb for it or anything like that. But like, yeah, I feel like it made people lose respect for healthcare and also for each other too. Like there was just absolutely no respect during that time. It was crazy.
Yeah. Good. On your comment towards, you know, we have the obligation to take care of our patients first. I think that is something that is easily makes us lose sight of things, even as an experienced nurse, but especially because I know that you talk more to like new nurses or people that are going into nursing school. Here's my saying, and people can take it however they want. You know, one of our code of ethics is to do no harm, but that doesn't mean take a lot of shit.
Yeah.
You know, if you can't take care of your own basic needs first, you are immediately limiting the impact that you can give to your patients. And I think we forget about that when we're like, oh, well, I have this obligation to my patient to do these things, regardless of what it is. It could be, you know, taking lunch on time. It can be taking a vaccine. It could be anything of the extreme, but your obligation has to be first to yourself, because then you can't take care of other people. So to do no harm does not mean you take a lot of shit with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Very true.
It's there's another fine line of like, you know, they say that the vaccine was preventing transmission of the virus, which we've seen time and time again that they're actually, you know, there's not, you know, the studies are saying that, you know, it doesn't necessarily prevent transmission, but it does prevent the severity of it when you do contract it. So there was also another mishap with that as well, like with the arguing between that, and like either way, like you said, like we're human beings too, and we should have the right of medical choice. And just because, you know, the code of ethics, like people do get that mixed up, and I think that was a really good point. The do no harm. It was perfectly said. Like we don't have to take a bunch of shit. You don't have to risk your life to go do your job. I mean, I know that might sound dramatic to a lot of people, like risking your life by taking a vaccine, but at the same time, like, I mean, what's stopping other things from happening after that, where they can mandating in general, I just feel like is just completely wrong, especially with anything like medical choice. So it's terrible. It was pretty crazy. I didn't think we'd ever have to deal with that.
And yeah.
But do you have more thoughts? Looks like you have more thoughts on it.
And I think during that time, you said you were like a nurse for
yeah, like a year and a.
Well, you were a nurse for a year and a half at that. I think a lot of people were already experiencing burnout, and burnout can change the way that you perceive things. It can change your attitude towards a lot of stuff. I personally was already burnt out before COVID came.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that just made my burnout just a lot more when it came to like seeing some of those things that we saw during COVID that we've been seeing for a long time. COVID just kind of exacerbated that. But people's history, what they experience in life changes, like how you would sit down and have someone like talk to them like, okay, like here's the vaccine rolling out. Here's, you know, where things are going. So if someone has a history of I don't know. I think I just lost train of thought. um, of already being burnt out, they're going to be less receptive to some of those things.
Yeah.
And less receptive to saying like, okay, like this job's worth even sticking around for. Like I planned on staying for more than I did, but I ended up leaving because I didn't want to get the vaccine, but I didn't plan. That wasn't like my 5-year plan wasn't up yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
I planned on sticking around for a little bit longer, but it didn't end up working out that way. Yeah, I mean, I just don't think there was a lot of things that was taken into consideration and how they were trying to get the nurses to buy into getting vaccinated.
Yeah.
And I think if we had taken a different approach, things would have been different in terms of, because this was more of like a trust issue than it was of anything else.
Yeah.
It's a little complicated and complex than that. But if you really wanted to break it down to the bare minimum thing, I think it was more of like, I don't know to trust the company that makes the vaccines. I don't know to trust, the people who are pushing the vaccines. Are they just getting incentives? Whatever,
Yeah.
Yeah, it raised so many alarms. Like they pretty much raised every single alarm in my book, like incentivizing. You have to, mandate. And then, of course, like weaponizing politics into it as well, like getting people mad at each other for whether they chose to get it or not to get it. It was just like, yeah, it raised every single alarm that you would put distrust into. Which, yeah, it's, and I guess we can kind of transition into that, like with me being a new nurse and stuff at that time, relatively new. I mean, just a little over a year of experience, and obviously. Like before I was a nurse, I was as a CNA at a hospital too, so I wasn't like completely brand new to healthcare, but it was, you don't,
okay.
like you put so much, like with, you talk about you had a 5-year exit plan already. With me, I was just getting started. I had no idea how long or what I was going to do. I was just trying to like, absorb whatever I can and like learn. And then it was, from my personal experience, it was super discouraging. Like, with, being at the hospital at the bedside, I didn't have any plans of like leaving anytime soon. Like, like you said, nursing shortage and all that good stuff, burnout was definitely real before COVID. But then after COVID, it definitely heightened things a lot more because when we saw the statistics, the biggest exit in nursing history, between 2020 and 2021, there was over 100,000 nurses that left the bedside. So it definitely encouraged people who were already thinking about it to leave. And it, like, with the whole mandate, that's what really, like, ignited my, like, oh, man. Like, it just put a bad taste in my mouth of, like, even, it's like a slap in the face. It's like, that was the analogy of it, really. It's just like, man, like, how much worse could you have made it?
Did you experience burnout within that 1.5-year time? Because I think that's a time where nurses most of the time are still excited about what they're doing, and they're just, everything is about nursing and the things that they're learning and the impact that they're making. It's still a very beautiful time for a nurse within first couple of years. Actually, I think it was 5 years for me.
Yeah, I definitely felt super excited about what I was doing. I felt like, there's a thing about nursing where you feel like super, like it's really cool to learn the things that you do. Like nursing is just such a cool profession. No matter what you hear, like, people who aren't nurses or, aspiring to be a nurse, they get a lot of discouraging comments, which kind of makes me sad because like nursing is like, don't get me wrong, nursing is a great profession because you do such cool things and you really do make a big impact just by being a nurse. And you really do get that, you get a real, like there's no human connection better than like taking care of somebody and then they like take the time to say thank you to you. Like you spent 12 hours, your entire day there. You spent like so much hard work on them just to, make sure that they're okay during that day and you're making them feel comfortable. There's no better feeling than that. Like being a good nurse, like actually being, and we talked about this before too, is that being a good nurse really just truly means that being a good human being. Like if you're a good human being, that's number one. you have to actually care about that person that you're caring for. Because if you're going to, treat it like it's just any other day job, then the people sense that. But I was still very excited going to work. And of course, that comes with anxiety as well. Like you feel anxious because, especially in the ICU and stuff. And I started in the ED, but the ICU is just completely different. Just a completely different workflow. So I basically felt like I started over. And it was a different patient population that was very hyper-focused. But I was super excited. Like, even doing, like, the silly stuff, like, doing titrating drips. You felt cool. Like, it was, like, just, you felt, like, not necessarily proud of yourself, but, like, the fact that you could even handle, like, all this stuff going on around you, like, definitely felt that. And that's what was disappointing, is because I had no plans of leaving anytime soon. I wanted to be known as that person, as, like, super reliable, and, like, I could be a good team player on the floor. And, like, I've always been a person that's, like, about, like, if you make the nurses happy, the patient care is going to be, like, 100 times better. Like, I've always thought, like, I wanted to be good friends with the other nurses on the floor, be somebody that they can, like, go and ask questions and help with, like, turning somebody as simple as that. Like, I've always wanted to be that person that was very helpful. And I was very much still that. But then, like, when COVID happened, I wasn't discouraged because of COVID. I was discouraged because of the mandates. And, like, the politics that were weaponized. And then you got people turning against each other. Like, with me, like, I already made a decision. I was not getting that vaccine. And there's nobody telling me, what they're going to put in my body. And I don't care. If I live on the street, I live on the street. There's not going to be a vaccine going in my body. And then the people at work that then announce it to everybody and, like, try to trash you and make you look bad, like you're making a poor decision. You don't care about the other workers. You're going to leave them shorter, and you don't care about your patients because you don't want to get the vaccine. It was super, like, people use the term gaslighting. Like, that was gaslighting.
That was our time.
Yeah, it was super discouraging because, I'm still very, like, the nursing shortage issue. Like, people don't understand that nurses, by complaining about their job, is going to, in turn, make your chance of surviving in the hospital much better. Because people think that nurses just like to complain. Well, you guys do understand that nurses, do all of the healthcare tasks in the hospital, right? So, like, if you don't have a nurse, there's nothing being delivered to you.
Yeah.
And it's the public. I feel like educating the public is going to make a huge difference, because it shouldn't just be nurses going out and strike. The public should be joining them, in my opinion. Of, like, God forbid, like, my child has to go to the hospital, I want to make sure there's enough people there that do their job. And I want to make sure that these nurses are super happy, because if they're not, like, by statistics, your care is going to be not as good. It's just going to be poorer. And your chances of survival will decrease the more unhappy these nurses are. It's just, that's directly correlated. But yeah, I was like, to get back on the topic, I was super excited still. And I still actually feel like I still have that spark of, like, you talk about 5 years. I haven't been a nurse for 5 years. And I'm hardly working at the bedside anymore. I do some house supervising at a smaller hospital. But I very do much love to still do bedside care, because I still have that spark of, like, this is exciting. And it's exciting to get to do these kind of things. But yeah, that mandate definitely threw me in a loop for how I felt about not nursing, but healthcare, I guess. So
I don't think there's a lot of, like, there's education out there, but I kind of, like, feel like some of the education is just kind of silly, what they say about preventing burnout to the nurses. Like, some of the stuff that they teach us is not, like, I don't know, it's not applicable most of the time, or it's not individualized. I don't know. So what are your thoughts on the education that's out there now for nurses on preventing burnout?
I think I don't know. I think they put the priority on, like, I don't know. It kind of seems to me that they kind of put it like, oh, it's the nurse's fault that they're burnt out. Like, they need to be able to handle more. Like, you need to learn how to handle more. That's why I feel like it comes from the wrong direction. I think the direction is wrong. I think the direction should be, of course, number one, make the workplace environment a desirable thing to continue to go to. Just like everybody else, like if you go to your desk job and you get surrounded by 3 new people that are just like completely like terrible people or they're bullies, you're not going to want to stay there. And that's just like a very simple example. But like that's essentially what they're doing, is pushing people out by making the workplace environment undesirable to continue at. Like there's definitely lots. I've been at a few other hospitals, and the one I left, that wasn't nearly like, I actually loved the place because they did do a decent job. I thought they did a decent job compared to what I was used to at the other hospitals. Because it can get really bad. Like not nearly enough nurses on the floor, and they don't support the nurses on the floor. The management is just completely. I think management has to deal with a lot of it, like their job roles.
You have good leaders, very good leaders.
And the defining of their job role is important too. Like, what are the managers expected to do? Do they actually come in and when it's the bedside short? Do they actually come in and work on the bedside? Do they actually help with patient care at all when it is short? But most importantly is like, are they even being supported of getting the number of nurses and the right people at the bedside too? So it's another, like, once again, complex issue. But I definitely think to answer your question, the education piece that they're throwing at nurses is doing the adverse thing by they're coming in from a direction that nurses are like not able to handle it. So they should learn the coping skills to handle it instead of actually changing the issue that's actually causing the entire thing. So they should put more attention on the workplace, because like I said, if your nurses aren't happy and they don't want to stay, you're not going to have as good care. And of course, that turns into like saving money for the hospital. Like you're going to lose lots and lots of money if the patient care is not good. So they're putting the attention, and I think it's like the investment into bedside care in general is not good enough. I think they're putting the focus on the nurses and like it's their fault, and or not necessarily their fault, but they just need to learn how to cope with it. They need to get a little bit better at handling the problems. That they're expected to handle the problems, so they need to get better at it versus actually making it better for them.
I wonder if some of this will change I'm hoping one day this actually happens. I don't know if it ever will, but, because nurses are part of the package that comes with the cost of the bed.
Yeah.
Or the room, right? We don't get to charge for our services. So I'm wondering if some of that will ever change, if we ever get to be separated in terms of like, we don't just come with the room. Sorry, you're going to pay us for our services.
Yeah.
Like a physician gets paid for their services.
Yeah.
Sort of like that. I mean, we're not definitely physicians, but you get what I mean by that.
No, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. It's a smart way
so
to do it.
I do think that learn how to do more so that we can just keep bundling everything that you can take care of in with this this charge that we do for the room.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely think that burnout in nurses, both novice and experienced, is a big issue. And I don't think that people know how to prevent burnout or even be aware of it happening.
Yeah.
Because it's expected. Like, you just handle it. This is what you signed up for. Or we think burnout means we have a sour attitude or morale is bad.
Yeah.
So I was just curious.
Yeah, that's the misconception. And I agree with you. I was talking to people when I was working there at the bedside about, how interesting would it be that nurses are kind of like how physicians are looked at, like more of like contracted out versus like actual employees. Where the nurses, because I think the big issue with the hospital systems is that the nurses are seen as an expense. Like they're an expense, and then the physicians, of course, they have a higher role in the healthcare in general. They're seen as money makers. they make the money for the for the hospital, but the nurses are seen as expenses. So that's why, okay,
It
well,
really,
naturally, what do humans want to do? Keep their expenses down, because this is a business. We want to keep the expenses down. We want to find the minimum of like how much, okay, we're going to balance it with the patient care now. Okay, that's why we have nursing ratios that aren't necessarily the supportive of great patient care, except for maybe California. That's the one state that actually has a nurses union that actually has mandated ratios. I think it is interesting. I think it would be interesting to see nurses actually not seen as an expense and actually contract out and see how much more improved the healthcare is, and for number one, and then also how much better the workplace is, number two. That would be pretty interesting. But I don't know if that would ever happen.
it's always blown my mind how nurses are seen as an expense, because the reality is the cost of hospital-acquired pneumonia, hospital-acquired, pressure ulcers, all of those things. When we're at the bedside 24/7, we are the most opportunity for preventing all of those costs that the hospital get all the time. I mean, I don't know what the statistics are now or how much hospitals pay or lose in terms of being reimbursed by Medicare or other insurance companies, but we're the key people to prevent those things. And if we can't prevent them, then we should be seen as an investment rather than a cost. And I just never really understood that.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, you can see like we are treated as a cost, not an investment, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Most times. And there's people out there that don't, but I would say most times.
Yeah, the overarching, industry of healthcare in general, yeah, it's definitely, nurses are an expense. They want to keep it as low as possible, which is why there is these things such as ratios, and the ratios aren't supportive of actual patient outcomes. They're actually supportive of the financial piece of it all. Because if it was for patient care, like statistically we know, like the more patients in general that you have, the more likely that patient's going to have poor patient outcomes in the hospital. So it's sad to see that, because that's where there is that fine line, once again, the financial piece versus the actual healthcare piece. And these hospital systems, if they would change maybe the way that nurses are contracted through their jobs, maybe they're not employees, or maybe nurses do actually have some kind of union out where they are contracted out through these hospitals. I wonder how much better the care would actually be. So
yeah.
And financially wise, I bet it would. Honestly, I would probably argue that it would financially be more favorable for them too, because it, like you said, if you think of it like an investment, like that nurse, based off their experience, is this somebody you would want in your hospital? Most of the time, most nurses are great. There's obviously this bad, just like human beings. There's good and bad human beings. Well, there's good and bad nurses too. The hospitals can the better their workplace is, you're going to attract better nurses. That's just how it's going to be. And that's how it already is. But when it's contracted out like that, that's definitely a huge game changer, I feel like. Because, I feel like it should be kind of in control of the number two people is one, the physician, the primary provider that makes the medical decisions. And then there's the person who delivers the healthcare, which is the nurse. So you need both. You can't just have someone just, ordering and then there's no delivery. You can't just order your package off of Amazon and then, if UPS is your deliverer and they suck at delivering healthcare, it doesn't matter what you ordered off Amazon or what Amazon decided to do, because your package is going to be broken by the time it gets to your doorstep. Same thing with healthcare. It's people don't understand that too. So
yeah.
Yeah, so that's one thing I always talk about, since I started my company really primarily focusing on nursing students, and we do our individualized nursing tutoring and all that, and helping nursing students pass nursing school. But another thing we really focus on is transitioning to the bedside, because it's getting more and more difficult, I feel like, from what I hear on these stories. We're a part of a bunch of Facebook groups, And it's just kind of crazy, the kind of stuff we hear about, transitioning to the bedside is getting more and more discouraging. Like these nurses come out here and they're like already burnt out before they even get to the bedside. Like the overwhelming, because like think about like there's just not very many people that, like the charge nurses nowadays are less than 1 year experience, which, some people might be just really good, but overall, if that's a statistic, like there's the floor is short and you have a nurse that's already, still trying to learn in their charge. That's not only scary, but also like super difficult to have longevity in the field. So that's, I always try to tell my new nurses and I'm still new too, which I think is kind of unique, but I always tell new nurses that, like, do not like throw yourself, like don't like make your whole life nursing. Like nursing is a great profession, but I feel like people really get drowned by like they're excited, so I think that's part of it. But also like they'll just take anything when they get out of the school. Like they'll just take a terrible, like a lot of hospital systems are putting terrible contracts in where, they'll offer you a sign-on bonus, but then 9 times out of 10 you get put in this terrible environment where you have to stay for 2 years to keep that sign-on bonus. Then if you leave early, then you have to pay them back the money. It's just like, it's just the craziest thing. So like, and they always get the new grads for it because they know, like, and they know exactly what they're doing. And it's sad. So I always try to kind of not necessarily warn, but be patient with your first job and really try to find a place that's going to be supportive, because I feel like that is like life or death with if you want to continue being a nurse or not. Because if there's something, if your first experience is very terrible, I don't know, I don't think it's going to be a very good chance that they stay for a long period of time at the bedside. So
for sure.
I was curious. I was going to ask, this will be like the last question before we get off, because we'll get off here. I know we got to go. My last question is like, how long have you been a nurse, first of all?
15 years.
15 years. So like, I guess my question is, and maybe it's not different, but like, was it different for you? Like, how much different is healthcare when you started versus what it is now? Like in the nursing world, where it was at the bedside for you before you left. Like, did you notice like a big difference, or was it kind of like the same when you first started?
So this will be interesting. I feel like it was different in the sense of getting busier. Busier in times of like being in the ICU, the patients being sicker. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the patients that are being sicker and coming in compared to the experience that was available to provide, that's probably the biggest change that I've seen over the course of 15 years is that. And I think that just kind of comes where, what do they call it? The baby boomers leaving the hospital. Yeah. And then we're getting the new people come in that have least experience. Because more retired nurses, have the bulk of the experience. But that was difficult. That's a difficult thing to kind of maneuver. I only worked at 2 hospitals my entire career. So the one that I started out at in Amarillo, I just moved here. So I was only a nurse for, I think 9 months in Amarillo, and then I moved here to Dallas. But so I don't know a lot of other hospitals. Yeah. And I took a break after I got my master's degree and went into administration, and then went back to bedside and went back to the same hospital. And I think just because I'm assuming, I still would say it's a pretty good guess that the challenges that you have at one hospital are abroad. Yeah. So you're going to see a lot of the same challenges at all of the hospitals. So to me, it's like you have a really good crew. You like the people that you work with. You just want to embrace the stuff more with people that you're already familiar with.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I didn't really see a lot of changes other than that. You could just definitely tell that our skill sets weren't keeping caught up with the demand of what was coming in.
Yeah.
And that's just growing society.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was like kind of interested to see if what you would say about that, because you always hear like the nurses have been like nurses for like 40 years, and they always talk about like how different it is now. So it's pretty interesting, like, because I definitely do think I think there is, the more the nurses talk about it, and like we see in more and more like strikes going on, I think something is bound to happen finally about, you know, the shortages and all that good stuff, because we don't necessarily have a nursing shortage. We have a nursing bedside shortage. So, like, if we can figure out a way to make the environment desirable, then we'd be just fine. So,
now, I could say I agree about this. Like, I wonder if there's anybody else that remembers this. Maybe one of the biggest changes was when I first started as a nurse, we did report by recording ourselves on a cassette.
Really? What was the reason behind that? For like later use or what?
So, I mean, yeah, we would go in the break room and we would record ourselves, and then the other person would come in and listen to the recording as we were still taking care of the patient.
Wow.
And then
I didn't know that was a thing.
Once they were done listening, we would sleep.
Yeah. Man, they would.
That was the worst. That's the worst time ever. I would never go back. So probably as much as we hated bedside nursing, like reports for shift change,
yeah,
I appreciated it because of like, nope, this is way better than the cassette recording.
Yeah.
Old school.
Yeah, I didn't even think that. I didn't know that was a thing.
No, I think yeah, everybody probably knows how old I am now.
That's so interesting. Yeah, because like the hospital system would be throwing a fit if you did that nowadays, because you know they're super super on top of like doing the bedside reports now, because the patient and everything being there. So that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to. That's pretty interesting. I've never even heard someone even talk about that before. So.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Well, thank you so much, Tanya, for joining us.
Thank you.
It was great to have you on as our first guest, and got a lot of good topics. I feel like will help a lot of people. So we're gonna clip it up and stuff and get it out there.